Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Showing Up For You. I am Shon.
I'm Jasmine.
Hey Jasmine.
What's up?
Guys, today we are talking about something that has a lot of seriousness to it, and I think it was hard for us to identify what was going on in us. So just to make sure that we're clear on all this, we are talking about things we're struggling with just so we have a better better ways to explain it to you. We are not experts in any way, but the whole point of this podcast is to make things relatable.
Yeah.
And pretty much empty ourselves out and be naked enough to say, this is something I struggled or I do struggle with.
Yeah.
And in my journey to label it or identify what it is, I'm hoping that I can exemplify or share something for you that would help you get through it or avoid it.
Truly.
In most cases.
Right. Try to be like, nope, not me.
So today we are actually talking about trauma. So the biggest question we came up with, or like kind of topic coverall, was, are you passive or has trauma shown you that it's safer to hide parts of yourself? So there's a few keywords in there. There's trauma, right? The word trauma, which definitely is a hard and dramatic and like very like serious word, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the word passivity. So one thing that we've noticed is we've gone through life instances that have affected later relationships or even just the way that we present ourselves. It doesn't always have to show up in an intimate relationship, but it could show up in how you see yourself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's important to note that there are different kinds of trauma. And I want to make that clear before we go further, just to identify where we are. So there's, almost lost my stuff here. So there's complex trauma, which is very common, but it's like living in a area for that's prone to like natural disasters, high criminal areas, high criminal activity areas, high poverty stricken areas, right? There's secondary trauma, and secondary trauma is like witnessing, something happen. Like for myself, I saw my parents fight.
Yeah.
They weren't boxing up with me.
Right.
But
right.
I saw things and it affected me later on in life, right? Emotional trauma. So these are just a few. So like I said, there is like crazy, like intentional trauma of, hey, there's an instance, and it could be anything from being assaulted, being in a serious car accident. I'm not going to put a limit on that because there's so many, and I really don't want to just kind of box that up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because everybody experiences things
everybody does.
Right.
So, but what we're talking about today is more of emotional trauma and passive trauma. So that emotional trauma might look like, types of abuse, bullying, discrimination, humiliation, child neglect, unsafe environments, or like household dysfunction, which I'm like, is that everybody? Is it just okay?
Raise your hand if
and racism, like that's also right. And so there's different kinds. So we just want to identify that that's the kind we're talking about. We're also talking about passive trauma that kind of identifies with the idea that like I was neglected in a way of not affirmed. Passive trauma can look like I was never valued as a child. Passive trauma can look like I wasn't, I gave and I gave and I gave and I wasn't thanked and I wasn't appreciated in those like authority figures in your life. And that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Right. And so just to make sure we're clear on that, that's what we're talking about. We all have gone through some kind of trauma, and it is very important to understand that the strongest person in the world may not be affected by the traumatic 10 pile-up car crash, right?
Yeah.
But they are very well affected by the passive trauma of having a parent neglect their, accomplishments.
Yeah.
So we never know who or how we're going to take or receive that kind of thing. And the important thing is just to acknowledge it.
Yeah.
So that's my spiel. Just want to make sure that's out there.
Yeah.
As we go.
No, that's so good. I think it's really important that we like identify, what those things, because everybody experiences things differently. And I know that in this podcast, like our hope is, like you mentioned, for us to share the things that are impacting us and like the focus is on like, what we're talking about. I know that a lot of some of those emotional, traumas that you talked about, I heavily resonate with. Like as we were preparing for this, I was like, shoot, that happened. This is why I'm the way that I am. You know what I mean?
Reflection.
Right. Like I didn't ask for that self-reflection, but like here we are. And like one thing that stood out in my mind, or like the first thing that came to my mind was being told like go figure it out. Something that I was like, almost like, right. Like something that in a way like I manipulated in my head to be like, oh no, like because I was told to go figure it out, like I have this independence about myself. But that actually ended up, my independence became a trauma response rather than me like seeking out independence. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's, I think about my life now, or I look back and, being told like, you just like need to go figure it out for yourself. I'm like, that's why I don't know how to ask for help. That's why I'm going to solve it before even, trying to collaborate with somebody. That's why, I have attitude when somebody wants to help me because I'm going to figure it out because you're not going to do it the right way, which is not necessarily true. So like that creates, these like responses, for me that are really just yikes.
And that's overwhelming because now you're telling me like, it's almost like I don't trust anybody else to do it but me because I've been, made to feel that I have to, and I mean, that's a complex that I think, happens in a lot of different homes and, or I think I've been in a position of you're supposed to be independent. You don't need nobody. You don't need.
Right.
And as good as that sounds in the beginning,
right.
When you get into a relationship, that junk will ruin you.
Yikes.
It will ruin you.
Yeah. Or even just like when you get a job and you have to like, we work in a creative field, so we have to be collaborative.
You have to share that responsibility. Like, because there's, first of all, quality over quantity. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And you said it. Like that is that's a crazy trauma response just to kind of like, how does that like affecting you? Because it can't just be a you thing. Like that has to show up in your relationships or your like work relationships or even your friendships.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. It shows up often. And even I think now I'm being challenged to realize there's a lot of things that I can't do alone. Like I know that I'll like speak from a work setting. I have for a long time had this mindset of like, I need to be by myself, sort through things by myself and then I'll bring it to you. But when I bring it to you, actually this is the right way and I don't need you. I don't need your contribution.
Why am I here?
Right. So it's like, but that's like super negative. And so and also like, in relationships, I have a really hard time, and I would say this shows up very heavily in friendships. I'm like, you're not like my romantic partner. Like, what is it that I actually like need from you? And so, and that just creates a whole like downhill, decline within that. And so and I would say like it became passive because I actually, along the way, I didn't realize like I had this narrative of like independence is a good thing.
Yeah.
Doing things by yourself, that's a good thing. But it's good in certain, situations. Yeah. But if I'm recognizing that it's like a trauma trigger, that's where it's like, dang sis, we got to think about this differently.
Okay. Dang. Okay, that's hard. Because then then I have to ask you how, because I think you're going there. How does like emotional or passive trauma like turn into or translate into like passivity? Because what I hear is like trauma is going to somehow show up, like your trauma response shows up somewhere.
Right.
So you're talking about the idea that independence is like actually turning into a bad thing, right? So now you're not going to be offered the help that you really need. Nope. Because Jasmine has it all figured out, right? So that's how that shows up. But there's a lot of times that we experience trauma and then it later shows up as us being passive about certain things to, avoid or to like not go down that road again.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I guess even in your example, what that might look like is like, I'm not asking for help. I won't present myself as someone who needs you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what is it that makes that like trauma or that like emotional trauma, whatever, turn into like that passive, it's all good? Like, what do you think happens there?
I don't think it's a great safe space.
Oh, absolutely.
You know,
I think we've established that.
Right. That is, but I think like, you know, within that, I'll actually be honest. I get into these points of like passive to passive aggressive. Meaning like you've seen me do this. I'm just gonna be super honest. Where I'm like, I take on all of these things thinking that I can do them like by myself. And then my like aggression, the passive aggression part of it looks like, well, if you want to, when I actually need help, right? Like, and I need something taken off of my plate. And so it's like when somebody offers me that help, the passivity in it is like, I have it handled, but like if you want to. And it's so, and it hurts me. Yeah. You know what I mean? Ultimately, like at the end of the day, it's just like something that hurts yourself, but it's something that like, I think that we can so easily convince ourselves in our minds that like, no, like you still can do this. You still like have this, but there's something
We're
that's
drowning.
so right. I'm like, help me. You know what I mean? Like you have your white flag up, you know, your big SOS, but it's like that, those small moments or, you know, something that, especially like when, you know, in a relationship to people that you genuinely trust to help you. Cause I think that's something that I have always really struggled with is that like, I think that I'm able to let those people that I do trust into that, but because I'm drowning so much in something that has impacted me for so long, it's like I can't break that barrier. Wow. You know, which is really hard. So sometimes like, I know with you, I vocalize like, I won't ask for help. I won't, but like, I'm going to try. You know, I'll send you a Marco Polo and be like, this freaking sucks and I'm in shambles and I just need help.
Why do you keep doing this to yourself?
Right, exactly. So I hope that answered your question.
It did. And I think that, you know, I think it's really awesome that we can see like the different spans of it because it shows up differently for like my family life, right? I mentioned in a one of our other episodes that my husband, you know, grew up in an atmosphere or household where they were one person spoke for everybody, right? And if he spoke against that, it was a problem. And I think, and one of the examples I gave is when I got together with the family, when we were like first newly engaged, I think I got together with the family and it was like me and my in-laws and my husband, and my father-in-law said something like rude. And I looked at my mother-in-law like, girl, you gonna say something?
Right, that's your husband.
And like she didn't say anything. And I was like, maybe she didn't hear him. But she just kind of just was like, And then I looked at my husband like, are we not going? Like, are you going to, you know? Right. And he was like, and I said, all right, I'll take this one for the team. And so I spoke against it. And I said, hey, like that's, you know, with all due respect, that really wasn't nice. And I don't feel very comfortable with you saying that thing to me. Yeah. You know what I mean? And boy, did that trigger a response. And in that moment, I was like, oh my God, is this what you've been dealing with? Right? Right. It's just... Jasmine can back it up. But so would then, you know, I realized like as our marriage went on, because we also discussed this in premarital counseling, but as our marriage went on, there were times that I for a while I thought he was just an easygoing guy. My husband is so easygoing. Right. He's a great listener. Right. And he just never wants anything and he just doesn't like confrontation. Yeah. And it later became like, no, you don't want to even approach it because of how you've grown up. Yeah. Like you don't even want to touch it. Yeah. So a trait that I thought was very much you being, I'm going to keep the peace and make everybody happy was actually you avoiding the slight possibility that every other person was going to react like your father.
Oof.
And that to it,
that gives me chills.
It blew my mind because I'm like, well, that changes everything.
Right.
Because after a while, and a lot of women, a lot of married women can speak to this, you kind of get like, I need you to say something back. We're having a conversation. It's okay for you not to agree with me. I need there to be a difference. I want you to know that I'm not mad that you don't agree.
Right.
So it's like, I don't even have a chance to I don't even have a chance to react to that. Because he's like, whatever you want, it's fine. And I'm like, first few times, I'm like, okay. Third time, I'm like,
I got questions. This is too easy.
This is too, right. So that's what I see as like these, these things. And of course, like I said, this emotional and passive trauma where it's like reoccurring issues that have like given someone this response of, it's not safe for me to tell you how I feel. And not just you.
Yeah.
It's not safe for me to speak up about my feelings. It's not safe for me to disagree, even in the most healthy, environments. Yeah. And that blows me away because on my side, like I've experienced that myself. And I think that, like I said, in college, I took advantage of like therapy. I was like, me next,
Right.
So I had to unpack that stuff so that when I did, get married, I was able to identify, okay, let me back up before I, you know what I mean? Even to the idea of like growing up in a household with like so many people and like having this mentality of like, don't touch my little corner of stuff, right?
This is all that I have and this is mine.
Right.
Yeah.
And then like me and my husband moved into like our second home was like this huge 2-story house in Hawaii. And I'm over here like, and he's like, nobody wants your stuff.
We could share snacks. You can have some of mine.
Like, you know what I mean?
But yeah, like it's something that's so small.
He's like, you good? Like,
right. But it impacted you so much. Oh, man.
But you get what I'm saying?
Yes.
So I can assume in the beginning of our relationship, he's just so easygoing.
Yeah.
And then guess what? Later on, I'm like, I want you to unload it. And then I learned a whole new husband. Like, I met a whole new guy.
Yeah.
A whole new guy.
Aww.
You know what I mean? And that kind of thing just like, it blows me away. But like, that's what we're saying when we're talking about how sometimes like traumatic experiences can turn into like this passive, attitude or this like, it seems easygoing. It seems like you keep the peace. But then it's like, well, how do you know the difference between you're passive because the trauma and no, you really just don't care.
Yeah. I'm just kidding. I'm like, I'm stumped, but I'm not. Because there's
so much, guys. Right. I'm just like,
Because I think I go, okay, I'm going to give an example. Okay. I didn't think I was going to go here, but I'm going here. There is an individual in my life who has been like Twitter fingers to me my whole life. And that created, and it was not until we started talking about this offline that I was like, oh my gosh, this is a response for me. I am debilitated to post things online sometimes because this individual always came back with all of these things to say about me passive aggressive. It was never outright with my name. There was just always something to say. But I say that all of that to say is like, I've gone through these ebb and flows of like, I'm triggered by this and I'm having like a trauma response, but there's really days that I'm like, I don't care. But sometimes, like you said, I don't know the difference, and it takes like, for me, it's taken other external things to happen in my life with this individual to recognize what I genuinely don't care about and like what I do or not what I do care about, but what is actually like triggering me, in these instances. I hope that makes sense. I know it's like, it's something that, again, like it's not flashy,
right?
Necessarily, but it's like he did so many things and I'm like, I am debilitated to share anything about my life because this one person is like reprimanding me or, talking shady or, whatever that may be. But then I'm like, I actually don't care that you're, but then
you do.
Right.
But then if you think about it, like, now how somebody new, right, coming into your life, how then am I going to create this space to identify whether that's an I don't care response or a I don't want to post or I don't want to share my good news? Because the thing about Jasmine is what we have in common. We will go through so many life milestones and celebrations silently.
Yes.
And then show up pregnant. I mean, like, you know
Surprise!
what I mean? Not her. You know what I mean? Like, show up, with having like, we are very fine with silently going through, and it's not, there's nothing, that's not a traumatic response to anything.
Yes.
But like, on top of that, I know that there are times that I would love for you to share the things that you're going through. I would love for you to, I'm proud of you. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so I know, she don't care. She doesn't care because she doesn't need this affirmation from the world. But as somebody that's like, if I'm new and I don't know all this, how am I supposed to create this space that says, you can tell me if you really don't care, or if this is truly like something showing up in your life that you feel like you don't want the backlash. I mean, because I've done that. I'm like,
right.
If I do this, I play it out in my head like a crazy.
You were good about this. She'll lay out the scenario.
Listen, I will be like, if I do this, this might happen and this might happen, and how would I respond to this? And I might not care about the initial thing, but am I going to care 3 steps down if somebody does something or says something that affects me or my household? Because then I'm going to go into like mama bear mode, and we're going to, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so I do that.
Yeah.
So I can understand that. But how would I, like, what steps would I take? Somebody new, whether I'm an intimate partner, whether I'm like your new friend, coworker, how would I create that space if that boundary is open?
Yeah.
To say, do you really not care, or can we release this trauma response? Like, what?
Yeah. I think for me, like, what that would look like as a new person, ultimately, I think the thing that helps me best is like, do you feel comfortable to share with me how you feel about this? Because I think that opens the door to, one, it gives me the option to say yes or no.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, if I take that yes route, I'm able to, because I think there for me personally, there is like a level of control that I want to have, like in that space to know of like, this is how I'm going to respond. This is what I care about. And also like the level of relationship, I can tell you as much intimate detail about it as I want or I don't want. But I think that initial, question potentially look like, do you feel comfortable sharing with me, how you feel about this? And I could say, yes, I don't care, or yes, I do care to this extent, or this really impacts me, or this is like a really big response. And then, if I feel comfortable in that space, I can then open up to be like, do you have suggestions for how I can overcome this? Because I think that's something that I'm really bad at, is here are my feelings. I don't want solutions sometimes, but it's like, but that's the part of healing. That's the part of growing. It's like, we always talk about it in this podcast. We're so pro therapy. We're so pro, like, being able
outwardly
to
processing. Yeah.
Yeah. And as somebody who's really bad outwardly processor, I know that's something that, I think inwardly processing is good. But I am personally challenging myself to be better about in certain moments that I know that something's heavily impacting me, where I will project, I will be passive aggressive towards other people. That has to be a trigger for me of, how can we find solutions to this?
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
Yeah. What does that look like for you though?
I mean, like, it's only showed up in a few places, of course, because like, if you're not married to me, or you don't deal with me on a
daily basis.
You never know. But you know what? Like, in those situations, I think what helps is, my husband is very observant. He's like me. We will like watch a situation. We're like, So there's times he would say, "Okay, do you really not care, or are you already thinking of how it's gonna like come back?" You know what I mean? And that's really, kind of like because I used to respond in very concerned about everybody's reactions kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
I had to come up with that whole like choose how to lose. You remember how I have been saying that to myself for years.
So good.
And it's not that I think that we all should be like, let's go losers. Like, let's just be losers. It's like when I say lose, I say either I'm going to beat myself up about it, or it's going to eat me up, in a way of now, I would have wished I'd done something differently, or somebody's going to be mad at me because I did something differently. You know what I mean?
Right.
Or because I created a boundary that would limit them to the access that they used to have. Mm-hmm. And so for me, he understands that about me. He understands my rule of choose how to lose. So he'll say, okay, like, what are you more concerned about? Like, are you going to lose sleep over this? Or would you rather like this relationship take this, like, it's a necessary hit.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to things like just my relationship with my family, on how I handle things, or even creating boundaries with certain people, yes, it's unfortunate because I'm a family person and I love my family. Yeah. I'm already further away from them than anybody else. Like I've already spent the last 10, 11 years away from my family or living in some other state, right? Yeah. So yes, it hurts, but then I'm also like, but am I going to be healthier for my children and my husband?
Yeah.
If I, do this. And so when he asks me, do you really not care? Or like, are you choosing how to lose? Like, what are you doing right now? Mm-hmm. And there are sometimes I take the plunge on sticking up for myself or my family, or addressing, the response or the traumatic response.
Yeah.
And I have to like accept that I could get hung up on, I could get talked about, I could get, you know what I mean?
Like there's going to be a big L that you're going to have to take.
Yeah.
It's going to be.
You know what I mean? And, because one of my biggest things was like this idea that, we grow up and I don't know if this is something that you or anybody, listening has experienced, but you might remember something about your childhood and you're like, that hit me hard. It was normalized when I was younger, or was normalized when I was a teenager. And as an adult, I'm like, that's actually pretty sick. Right?
I don't like that it went that way.
I don't like that. Mm-hmm. And you might find yourself addressing the person about it, or addressing the environment about it. And, you might get the response of like, it wasn't that serious, or that's not how it happened. And that's very demeaning, and it's like invalidating. Like,
yes.
Am I crazy? Like I've been in those instances and felt like, am I crazy? So it stops me from like going back in my past and trying to like sort things out, because I'm like, am I the liar? Am mm-hmm. I crazy? Am I not telling the truth? Mm-hmm. And now I don't trust myself to like process my perception of my childhood. Whereas, because I don't want to like now look like I'm fibbing or lying on you.
Right.
Or them,
like,
or us.
How do you move forward in your adult life?
And that's the thing, is like, you can only piece that junk apart. Like you can't go on without addressing it.
Yes.
Because if you never realize why you started doing it, how can you stop it? If we never like go back into like what started it in the first place, or what triggered this in the first place, how am I then gonna like realize? Because what's gonna happen when an innocent person comes along and unintentionally does it? What? You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, poor guy, poor girl, like they don't even know that they just ruined whatever potential relationship y'all had.
Right.
So if we can't address that, you know what I mean? And so I said that to say that for me, I've had to just make that effort to identify, how am I losing this one, and what is it for? Mm-hmm. What is it worth? Mm-hmm. But as far as someone coming in, I think where I'm grateful is I've done the work myself, and I'm like open about, I don't like this.
Yeah.
Please don't do this to me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Don't do this thing to me. Or if they do it, I'm like, let me just let you know now, that makes me feel A, B, or C. And
yeah. Because at that point, then it's up to them how they continue mm-hmm. with that relationship, how they respond to you. Mm-hmm. No, I think that's so important. And that's something, again, I'm always gonna brag on her on this podcast, but you're so good at that. You're so good at that because because I think a lot of it is your approach, right? It's like, I'm being direct, I'm being graceful about it, and I'm like letting you know where I stand, because also that I think it opens a door that say the same thing back to me. If there's something that I did to make you uncomfortable or that you don't like, tell me that too.
Yeah, I'd want to know.
Yes. Yep.
I'd want to know. And that took a lot of practice, because a lot of people that aren't used to that directness, they're like, you're rude. And I can understand, like, okay, let me just try to soften that up. But it's all about, like I said, being direct.
Yeah.
But just to make sure that there's some action steps here, I do want to make sure that we understand that in creating that atmosphere or that space with your friend, your intimate partner, your cousin, your sister, your brother, whatever that looks like, right? Ask yourself like these few questions. It's like, are you avoiding confrontation to keep peace? And is that like your natural attitude, or is it because of something?
Yep.
And then, it's like, are you avoiding are you avoiding a response you experienced because of emotional trauma? Like, check in with yourself and ask those things, because if I don't know, I'm going to comfortably, go forward, with what's happening. And then, like, I think it's important to talk about signs of emotional trauma and, like, how they kind of look like either social isolation or withdrawal. Like, you know what I mean? Because what I think is one of the biggest things is, it's one thing to say, I'm not interested in this topic and I don't want to be a part of it.
Yeah.
It's another thing to realize, like, every time we start talking about football, you know what I mean? Like,
always want to fight.
You know what I mean? Or every time we start talking about, there are people that have experienced traumatic events on holidays, right?
Yeah.
And then every time we start talking about Christmas decorations, they kind of like clam up.
Yep.
These are things to notice in people. These are things to like acknowledge in your partners or your friends. And it takes observation. It takes that time to say, even if you don't feel comfortable enough asking, like, just pay attention.
Yep.
You know what I mean? There was a long time I just, like, I didn't have a good relationship with my dad. And so when people were like, yeah, this is what my dad does for me, and this is Father's Day, and I would just be like, I have nothing to contribute to this conversation. So, you know what I mean? I would back out. And these are things that I didn't realize I was doing yet. But, like I said, it's if we are wanting to create that space, and like I said, do it to your own discretion, respecting that person. And then look at me, I am just because I'm just big in here, y'all. Like, I'm trying, you guys. Look, I'm yelling now. But so making sure that you can, like, depending on your relationship, create that atmosphere. Yeah. Acknowledge that stuff. And observe. You know what I mean? Yeah.
It really does, like, make all the difference. And it takes a level of self-awareness. Like, you have to go there with yourself with that self-awareness, to recognize that, and vocalizing it is hard.
Oh my God.
Oh my goodness. Like, I'll speak, like, to our family. There's a lot of times that even you and we've just had to walk through certain conversations that was like, I am so, like, my body does, like, the way my body is responding, my voice, my chest, like, all of it is, like, so hard. But it's, like, after, on the other end of it, it's, like, so freeing, but also helps, I know, like, in our dynamic, for me, it's helped me recognize to be observant of others' behavior as well. And not just my own. Like, we had a family conversation once, and I observed the room, and I was like, I know what's happening here, and it's not going to go in the direction.
You did. You called that very early. And you did. You called that very early in the conversation. And I think for me, I get so excited to resolve. Right. That I was just hopeful that it would turn around. You know what I mean? In that instance. And I think that what you're saying is actually so valid, because it takes a lot of work to get to the point to want to acknowledge that, that traumatic response, or, whatever that looks like. You think about those that have, like, gone through some type of help or therapy or some kind of designated mediation, then you understand what it looks like to either confront that person or confront the issue openly. Both are hard. You know what I mean? Like confronting something that happened to you as a child and saying it out loud without, you doubting yourself, or you know what I mean? Like, and then,
belittling
also
it or being like, but it's
minimizing
fine.
it.
Yes, exactly.
Also in the same thing, it's like when you decide to approach the person that you feel had contributed to that.
Yeah.
That takes a lot. Nobody's saying that's easy. It takes a lot. And then to get there and realize like, you're not hearing me, or you're not going to change, or you're not going to acknowledge it. And that I get that. And that's.
Yeah. And I think and I say all that to say, cause like, I'm talking about, something that we were a part of, but in that moment, something that I grew from and what was so pivotal for me is that I had to make a decision how I would move forward with what I thought was going to happen. I hope too. I had this hope for resolve and like that people would be heard. There wouldn't be justifications for certain things. That wasn't the reality. And I genuinely thought I was going to leave mad, angry, had all of these big negative emotions, but I was able to leave and be like, what I felt was valid. I shared what was impacted me, and although it was not received, it was heard. I put it out there, and now I get to decide how I move forward with this trauma response. And I think that was something that was so pivotal for me, because that would have happened like 3 years prior. Yeah. It would have been a constant spiral. I think that's my point here, is like you can decide if you're going to constantly spiral and continue to contribute to the passivity as a whole, right? Or come out of it and make the decision of how you're actually like going to respond to those things in your own boundaries.
Right. Well, now, okay, so then let me challenge you. What do you say to those people, which is understandable? What do you say to those people that are like this, being passive about this trauma response, or hiding or just not addressing this traumatic event, whatever that might look like, is my survival mode. Yeah. And I need to keep things going, because if I address this, I'm going to break down, or it's going to affect my family. Because you got to think about it. People that have gone through traumatic responses, they start new lives. Yes. They're not, they're not every, trauma victim is like hermited up and like avoiding, social interaction. They start new lives. And it might be a survival mode. It might be a safety mode. It might be, I've been doing well so long, busying myself instead of, confronting it. Yeah. Like, what do you say to those people? Because I guess for me, and I'm saying in the situation you're talking about, coming into this and seeing what was happening with the family and how it was affecting like my family, I actually started off passive. Like I started off like covering it up to save the explosion of what my husband might become, or what it might happen to us. And so I found myself covering for people. You know what I mean? I found myself trying to make up for things for people. Yeah. And just, it's okay. I'll do the work. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. I'll do the work. And so that worked for me because we had new babies, because we were moving, because the military is crazy. Because you're right. Right. And so that's not, like, I don't want to, that happens a lot. Like, what do you say to those people? Because we're trying to live. Right. Like, we're just trying to survive. Yeah. I think it's dependent, like, on the situation and, like, how, like, because what I believe and what I've observed with your family, like, you guys created a healthy boundary. My immediate family. Yeah, your immediate family. It was a boundary that didn't keep you bound. It was actually a boundary that gave you freedom. And so I'm like, that's the, because I know that
I think I talked about this like in a previous episode, probably when we were talking about boundaries, but like my boundaries gave me freedom. It didn't keep me bound, because I think some boundaries can keep you bound, because you sit there, you sit in your head, you think about all the negative things, but like creating healthy boundaries for yourself, it takes a lot of courage to do that. And I think that is something that's like super incredible and should be encouraged more,
right?
You know, in families or in anybody, in a relationship with your coworker, in a friendship, whatever, you know, the context may be. Yeah.
I saw something the other day, and it was the quote or the statement pretty much said, like, everybody, like, a boundary doesn't necessarily go for everybody. Boundaries are selective. And sometimes we have to say, this person gets a different type of boundary than that person, or this group of people get a different, because you might have exposed different actions or interactions that make me feel uncomfortable, but these guys know how not to do it. And so it's okay to do that. You know, I just wanted to highlight the importance of, not everybody's going to come out of this like season of just, let me deal with life. I'm not trying to bring up this volcano.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I said, whatever that looks like, it could be something as, you know, devastating as an accident, a natural disaster, you know what I mean? And it could definitely be something as emotionally like pulling as that, you know, not being acknowledged, not being affirmed. These are all things that affect us differently. Yeah. And like I said, again, you know, for me, there are things that I didn't even know was breaking me, right? And I remember, I'm sure I've talked to you about this, but like I had to come like to this epiphany, like I keep wanting affirmation from somebody that's never going to give it to me.
Yeah.
And every milestone I've hit, never have they been like, oh my God, I'm so proud of you. You know, never have they been like, you did it. I like the thing. Like, but every milestone I hit, I have them in mind. Every milestone. Every time. I'm like, I'm going to show you. This time you're going to say, you're proud of me. This time you're going to, I am 35. I'm 35. Yeah. And I just accepted I can't do that, because I was no longer doing it for like myself. I was doing it so that you could be proud of me.
Yeah. In hopes of being affirmed by you.
Right. And that was so it's like I'm almost needy, like, you know what I mean? And so, but that was like motivating for me. And it showed up, you know, as motivation. It showed up as like drive. That wasn't a healthy drive, right? So when we look at, you know, of course, like we were talking about passivity, but these trauma responses can turn into so many other things. That wasn't drive. You got to think about so many people that have been like body shamed, and so they're in the gym all the time, and you're like, yeah, you're healthy. They're dying inside. Yeah. Because somebody made them feel this big because of how their body looked, and you think that they're just some cool gym rat. No. Yeah. We all have like these responses that turn into different things that can be hidden or disguised by what would be called, you know, good traits. Yeah. You know? Yeah. And I'm just here to say, like, I can understand the normalcy in that. Nobody is belittling or minimizing that. I get that survival mode. I get it. I get it. So when you do decide I have to address this, like, understand, like, it's not a 24 hour to 7. No. It's like, however you process that, you know? And just to drive it back to this, like, when we talk about creating that atmosphere for yourself and for somebody else, like, what would you say are like just to be able to like put out some action items and suggest what's helped you?
That's a great question. I think what's helped me through this process, I'm still going through it. I'm still going through a lot of it. Yep. You know, because I think things are starting to surface. You know, but I think one thing, and I share this often, just processing, is like finding one individual that you trust to be beside you in this. You know, that's impacted me so much, because I've tried to allow space to be like, I actually need, if I am crazy in this, you're the person I trust to actually tell me and to hopefully see this differently. So I think that's something that has really helped me. Also recognizing if this is going to debilitate me in the long run, it's not worth it.
Yeah.
So I've had to decipher, like, whatever the situation may be, like, if I'm going to be just, like, stuck and not be able to move forward, then this is not something, I'm not ready.
Yeah.
To approach it. So I would say those are, like, the two really big things that have been super helpful for me. And I'm also still trying to identify new things. Like,
wow.
I'm just trying to learn, through this process, because it's very new for me. Like, I'll have seasons of, I'm just like, I'm feeling bold. And then I'm like, girl, emotionally, you are not ready for that, sis. Like,
the buck up. Look
right.
Okay.
Like, okay, big body, like, chill out. But I think it's, those moments definitely were telling for me, because it was like, it was, taking a pulse check, with where I'm at. And even just in new, I guess another thing I'll share, when I'm in new contexts in my life, I also have to kind of check with myself of, like, how do I feel in those moments and what triggers me? Like, what are my triggers? And when I identify what that trigger is, looking back and almost like tracing my triggers. So that's something that just gives me insight to see if there's, like, a pattern within those triggers.
Wow.
How about you?
Dang, you kind of got me stuck at like, I was gonna say other things, and then you said the triggers thing, and I was like, I'm uncomfortable. The triggers. So there's two things. Like, I want to talk about the triggers thing, but then I also wanted to just mention that for me, I had to acknowledge that it is an intimidating process when you do address that trauma response. And whether you decide to, like, do it, through therapy, or do it and, speak to the person themselves, you know what I mean? Like, those are both really big, bold steps that anybody should be proud of.
Yeah.
And it's hard. And it's like, it's a great investment for self, but don't, like, never underestimate, like, how big of a deal and how great that is for you. Like, I'm proud of anybody that's like, I made an appointment, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, yes. And so what I said that to say, like, addressing different traumatic experiences for me, like, to, both parents looked different, but it also looked different at different stages of their lives.
Yeah.
If I went to my mom and said, this is something I struggle with, majority of the time, her response is more like, that's not what happened, or it's like, so it's like, it's turning it into an attack on her rather than let's address why this happened.
Yeah.
And then I feel very guilty, because it's hard to differentiate, like, my parent did everything they could for me, and they sacrificed so much for me. And you almost feel guilty for, like, having bad thoughts, right? You're like, but they did so much for me. But I remember this one thing that changed, like, the trajectory of my life. It changed the way I see men. It changed the way I see myself as a woman. It changed the way you know what I mean?
Right.
And so when you make that transition to boldly acknowledge that, that's hard.
Yeah.
Because it's not, it took help for me. And somebody might be further along in their journey. This might not be you, but it took a lot for me to accept that you can love somebody and think they're your hero and be so proud of your relationship with them and still have an issue. You know what I mean?
Yep.
You can still have something that needs fixing.
Yeah.
And so once I was okay with that, I did have the courage to say, this is how I felt about this instance, or this reoccurring thing in my bringing up.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes when we're not ready to acknowledge, as the person being told this, as when we're not ready to acknowledge or sort out or fix a problem, we might take it offensively.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We might feel attacked. We might feel accused. We might feel that one thing trumps the entire experience as in our relationship.
Right.
And that's hard for the person making themselves vulnerable enough to tell you.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so my experience with that was like, I had to realize that maybe she's just not ready to hear it. And so even though I went in with this like solvency of, hey, I really want to share my thoughts and I really want to tell you this because I want a relationship to be better and love you and I just want more love.
I want this great atmosphere for us.
Right. As positive as I went in there, I had to accept that I wasn't necessarily going to leave positive, but at least you know.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's the reality of addressing this stuff. So that, like, let's be realistic about that.
Yeah.
On my dad, like, I definitely had, different responses, like bringing things up to him. And it wasn't until he had a moment in his life that caused reflection.
Yeah.
So I got 2 different responses from him, right? Before the reflective event that my dad had to go through, I call it a reflective event because we all have that, like, it could be near death. It could be like crazy experience where we're like, I got to get things together, right?
Yeah.
Like, we all can have that moment.
For sure.
But before my dad had that moment, I approached him about some things, and there were things he just wouldn't share with me. Yeah. There were things he would, and I respected that. And then an event happened, and it almost seems like just a new relationship happened between me and him, and he had taken some time for himself and reflected heavily. So when we were able to come back to this conversation again, he was willing to hear me. And it blew my mind because I was expecting a fight. Like, I was like, I don't want to.
Like, this is dangerous.
I'm so scared.
Yeah.
Right. And it blew my mind. But like, that encounter allowed me to say, this is how I feel. And his response, I was going through a lot at that time, and that doesn't make it okay. I'm sorry. And this is how I want to do going forward. And it just, simple.
Right.
I was like, what? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
He was hearing. So my point is you might have a great response like that. You might deal with somebody who's not ready to address it. But that's the reality of addressing traumatic responses or emotional trauma or passive trauma.
Yeah.
So I'm not here to like act like it's all going to be fun and games.
No. Yeah.
We are just saying that as you create that atmosphere, as you create those steps, or as you share those steps with someone else on how to help you get through it or avoid these triggers, which you avoid these triggers. Like, it's just be ready. Just be ready for real responses. Just be ready for that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because at the end of the day, like, you're in control of your own atmosphere and what you bring to the table. We never have control of what's going to be,
absolutely
reciprocated.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I don't know. This could be a never-ending conversation, but for the sake of time, wow, this was a lot.
This was. I'm actually sitting here so in awe, and honestly, like, my heart is in my stomach. But it's been good. Like, I know that these conversations, they challenge me through the rest of my week. To be more self-reflective, to even, on the other weird end, is like, how do I maybe trigger people?
Right. Like, I'd want to know.
I would want to know.
If I'm contributing to that trauma response.
Yeah, right. So I'm like, let's not go there. But, I know that, that's just something that I bring into my week.
Oh my goodness. So you guys, we, of course, as always, we just appreciate you guys sitting in on this and almost just watching us like outwardly process or talk it out. Yeah. Again, we do not have any type of like certification in this field. This is all coming from 2 brown-skinned girls who are trying to get through life.
That's it.
And survive.
Yes.
But we would love to hear your feedback, and we would love to know how you all deal with certain kinds of trauma, or how you feel is the best way to address it, or communicate solvency to someone that you might want to let in, but you just, for whatever reason, you just can't.
Definitely. So good. I love doing this with you, so thank you.
It's fun. This is fun.
This is fun.
Okay, guys, we will see you later. See you next week.
Yeah. See you next week. Bye.